The summer heat beat down on New York City like a heavy blanket. Elena Mercer wiped sweat from her forehead as she walked through Central Park, her designer shoes not made for this kind of outing. At 45, Elena rarely had time for walks. As the founder of Mercer Innovations, one of the biggest tech companies in the country, her days were filled with meetings, decisions, and lately worry. For months now, she'd been locked in a bitter fight with Dominic Walsh, her former business partner turned worst enemy. The battle had taken over her life, keeping her up at night and filling her days with stress. Today, she just needed to escape. "I should have brought water," Elena muttered to herself, feeling lightheaded in the afternoon sun. Her silk blouse clung to her back, and she considered turning around when a colorful stand caught her eye at the corner of the park path. A hand-painted sign read, "Sophia's Fresh Lemonade," in bright yellow letters. Behind the wooden stand stood a young woman with dark curly hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore a simple t-shirt and was arranging glass jars filled with lemon slices and mint leaves. Unlike the fancy food carts that usually dotted the park, this one had a homemade charm that made Elena pause. "How much?" Elena asked, approaching the stand. The young woman looked up with bright eyes and a warm smile. $3 for a small, $5 for a large. Elena handed over a $20 bill. "Large, please, and keep the change." "That's way too much," the woman protested, already reaching for change. "Consider it a thank you for saving me from heat stroke," Elena said with a small smile, something that felt foreign on her face these days. As the lemonade seller poured the drink, Elena watched her careful movements. There was something refreshing about her focus on such a simple task. "I'm Sophia," the young woman said, handing over a large cup filled with ice, lemon slices, and pale yellow lemonade. "Sophia Rodriguez." "Elena," she replied, leaving off her last name out of habit. Being a billionaire meant everyone wanted something from you. The anonymity felt nice. Elena took a sip and couldn't help the small sound of pleasure that escaped her. The lemonade was perfectly balanced, tart but sweet, with a hint of something she couldn't place. "Is that ginger?" Elena asked. Sophia's face lit up. "Yes, my grandmother's secret ingredient. Most people don't notice." Elena found herself smiling again. "It's perfect. How long have you been selling lemonade here?" "Just weekends for the past month," Sophia explained, adjusting the umbrella that provided shade for her stand. "I'm working on my master's degree in environmental science at Columbia, and tuition isn't getting any cheaper." Environmental science. Elena's interest was piqued. Her company had been developing sustainable technology for years, often fighting against larger corporations, like Walsh Industries, that prioritized profit over planet. "I'm focusing on sustainable water technologies," Sophia continued, her passion evident as she spoke. "My dream is to help develop systems that can be implemented in places without clean water access." For the first time in months, Elena felt her mind drift away from her corporate war with Walsh. She found herself asking questions about Sophia's studies, genuinely interested in the young woman's insights. Sophia spoke with knowledge and enthusiasm that reminded Elena of herself 20 years ago, before spreadsheets and shareholders had taken over her life. As they talked, Elena's trained eye caught a movement across the path. A man with a newspaper was sitting too still, the paper held a bit too high. One of Walsh's people, no doubt. They'd been following her for weeks. Elena stiffened but kept her face neutral as she finished her lemonade. She couldn't bring this bright young woman into her dangerous world. But something about Sophia's combination of intelligence, drive, and genuine kindness had cut through Elena's carefully constructed walls. "I should get going," Elena said, reluctantly checking her watch. "But this was the best lemonade I've had in years." Without overthinking it, Elena pulled out her business card and a pen. She scribbled her personal number on the back, something she almost never gave out. "If you're ever interested in seeing how environmental science works in the corporate world, give me a call," Elena said, handing over the card. Sophia looked down at the card, her eyes widening as she recognized the name. "You're that Elena Mercer." Elena nodded, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "Just don't sell that number to the press." Sophia laughed. "Your secret's safe with me." As Elena walked away, she felt lighter somehow. She didn't notice how intently the man with the newspaper was watching their interaction, or how quickly he pulled out his phone once she left. She didn't know that this simple stop for lemonade would soon pull her and Sophia into a dangerous game that would change both their lives forever. All she knew was that, for the first time in a very long time, something had broken through the lonely shell of her billionaire life, and it tasted like lemonade with a hint of ginger. Sophia stared at the towering glass building that housed Mercer Innovations, her heart beating wildly in her chest. 3 days had passed since her encounter with Elena Mercer in the park. She had debated calling the number for hours before finally gathering her courage. To her surprise, Elena herself had answered and invited her to the office immediately. "Just tell them at the front desk that you're here to see me," Elena had said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world for a billionaire CEO to personally invite a lemonade seller to her headquarters. Now, clutching her worn backpack strap, Sophia pushed through the revolving door into a lobby that gleamed with marble and steel. The security guard eyed her faded jeans and simple blouse with obvious suspicion. "I'm here to see Elena Mercer," Sophia said, trying to keep her voice steady. "My name is Sofia Rodriguez." The guard raised an eyebrow but made a quick call. His expression changed immediately. "Ms. Rodriguez, please take this visitor badge. Thomas will escort you to the executive floor." A young man in a crisp suit appeared and led her to a private elevator. Sophia caught her reflection in the mirrored walls and wished she'd worn something nicer. Her curly hair was fighting against the ponytail she'd hastily put together that morning. "Ms. Mercer rarely has visitors come directly to her office," Thomas said, breaking the silence. "You must have made quite an impression." Before Sophia could respond, the elevator doors opened to a floor that looked nothing like the corporate sterility below. Plants thrived in every corner, and the walls were glass, offering a breathtaking view of the city. Thomas led her down a hallway to a set of double doors. Elena greeted her with a warm smile that transformed her usually serious face. "Sophia, thank you for coming." She dismissed Thomas with a nod and gestured to a comfortable chair facing her desk. "Would you like some coffee? Or I could have someone make lemonade, though I doubt it would be as good as yours." Sophia smiled nervously. "Coffee would be great, thanks." As Elena pressed a button on her desk to order the drinks, Sophia noticed the dark circles under the billionaire's eyes, carefully concealed with makeup but visible up close. Running a tech empire clearly took its toll. "I bet you're wondering why I invited you here," Elena said, leaning back in her chair. "The thought did cross my mind," Sophia admitted. "It's not every day a CEO gives me their personal number." Elena laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise even her. "I've been thinking about our conversation. Your passion for environmental science reminded me of why I started this company. Sometimes in the corporate world, we lose sight of the bigger picture." A knock at the door announced the arrival of coffee. Once they were alone again, Elena's expression grew more serious. "I have a proposition for you, Sophia. Mercer Innovations has a summer internship program in our Environmental Technologies division. After reviewing your background—" "You looked me up," Sophia interrupted, then immediately regretted her boldness. Elena didn't seem offended. "Of course I did. I don't hand out my personal number to just anyone. Your academic record is impressive. Columbia's environmental science program is one of the best, and you're at the top of your class." Sophia shifted uncomfortably. The idea that this powerful woman had been researching her life was unsettling yet somehow flattering. "The internship comes with a generous stipend," Elena continued. "Enough to cover your tuition for next semester, at least. We're developing water filtration systems that align perfectly with your research interests." Sophia's mind raced. The offer was incredible, almost too good to be true. Working at Mercer Innovations would give her access to resources she could only dream about at school. But why would Elena Mercer take such an interest in a random student selling lemonade? "This is very generous," Sophia said carefully. "But I have to ask, why me? Surely there are hundreds of qualified students who apply for this internship." Elena's eyes measured her thoughtfully. "Sometimes the most valuable perspective comes from unexpected places. Your approach to sustainability challenges is creative and practical. Plus, I trust my instincts about people. They rarely lead me astray." What Elena didn't say was that her security team had spent 2 days investigating every aspect of Sophia's life, searching for any connection to Dominic Walsh. The young woman appeared clean, but Elena had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. When would I start? Sophia asked, her mind already calculating how this would affect her part-time campus job and studies. Monday, Elena said decisively. But first, I'd like you to tell me more about your previous work experience. Your resume mentioned an internship at Horizon Tech. Sophia nodded, suddenly looking uncomfortable. Yes, it was just a small firm. I mostly did data entry for their environmental impact reports. Elena noticed the slight change in Sophia's voice, the way her eyes darted away for a moment. During her background check, Elena had discovered that Horizon Tech was a shell company once owned by Walsh Enterprises, though the connection was buried under layers of corporate paperwork. Well, I hope you'll find this experience more hands-on, Elena said smoothly, deciding not to push the issue yet. You'll be working directly with our development team and occasionally with me. As they discussed the details, Sophia gradually relaxed, her enthusiasm for environmental science shining through. Elena found herself genuinely enjoying the conversation, something rare in her world of strategic business relationships. When Sophia finally left, clutching a folder of internship paperwork, Elena stood at her window watching the young woman exit the building below. Her security chief, Robert, entered silently. Well? Elena asked without turning around. Nothing concrete connecting her to Walsh, Robert reported. But Horizon Tech is suspicious, and there's a 2-month gap in her history last year that we can't account for. Elena nodded slowly. Keep digging, but discreetly. If she is one of Walsh's plants, I want to know what game he's playing. And if she's innocent. She paused, remembering the genuine spark in Sophia's eyes when talking about her work. If she's innocent, then I may have found something even more valuable than information. What's that? Robert asked. Elena turned from the window with a small smile. An ally who reminds me why all this fighting matters in the first place. As Sophia walked home, her mind swirled with excitement and disbelief. Working with Elena Mercer could change her entire future. What she didn't know was that she had just stepped into a dangerous game between two powerful enemies, one that would soon force her to choose sides in a battle she didn't yet understand. The first 3 weeks of Sophia's internship flew by in a whirlwind of activity. She quickly proved herself invaluable to the environmental technologies team, offering fresh perspectives that even veteran engineers hadn't considered. But it was her growing relationship with Elena that surprised everyone at Mercer Innovations. The unlikely pair began spending evenings in Elena's office, take-out containers scattered across the conference table as they discussed everything from sustainable technology to their favorite books. For Elena, these conversations were like coming up for air after years of drowning in corporate politics. You know, Elena said one evening as they reviewed data from a water purification project, I can't remember the last time I discussed anything besides profit margins and stock prices with someone in this building. Sophia looked up from her tablet, surprised by the personal admission. That sounds lonely. Elena's face softened in a way few people ever saw. It is. When you reach a certain level of success, people stop seeing you as human. They see you as either an obstacle or an opportunity. Which one am I? Sophia asked, her voice tentative but her gaze direct. Elena studied her for a moment. Neither. You're the first person in a long time who talks to me like I'm just Elena. The moment of vulnerability hung between them before Elena cleared her throat and pointed back to the data. Now, about this filtration issue. Later that week, Elena invited Sophia to join her for a crucial meeting with the engineering team. The company's newest sustainable energy project was hitting roadblocks that had the entire department stumped. I want a fresh set of eyes, Elena explained as they walked toward the meeting room. Sometimes we get too close to a problem to see the answer. The lead engineers frowned when they saw the intern following their CEO, but no one dared question Elena's decision. As they presented the problematic code that was causing system failures, Sophia listened intently, her forehead creasing in concentration. May I? She asked quietly when they finished, gesturing to the main computer. The team exchanged doubtful glances, but Elena nodded. Go ahead. Sophia's fingers flew across the keyboard, scrolling through thousands of lines of code. After several minutes of tense silence, she stopped. There, she said, pointing to a section that looked identical to the rest. The system is trying to process two commands simultaneously because this callback function isn't properly timed. It's creating a logic loop that overloads the system. The room fell silent. The lead engineer leaned forward, eyes widening as he checked her work. She's right, he said, sounding stunned. How did you spot that? Sophia shrugged. I did something similar in a project last year. It's easy to miss if you're not looking for it. Elena couldn't hide her smile. Her instincts about Sophia had been right. The solution would save the company millions in development costs and weeks of delays. As they walked back to Elena's office, she impulsively asked, "Would you join me for dinner tonight? To celebrate your breakthrough?" "I'd love to," Sophia replied, "but I promised my brother I'd help him with a project. Rain check." Elena nodded, ignoring the slight pang of disappointment. Of course. That evening, as Elena prepared to leave the office, her security chief Robert appeared at her door with a troubled expression. "We need to talk," he said, placing a folder on her desk. Inside were photographs of Sophia meeting with a man in a downtown cafe. Elena recognized him immediately. Martin Reeves, head of security for Dominic Walsh. "When was this taken?" she asked, her voice cold. "Yesterday afternoon." She told the office she had a doctor's appointment. Elena stared at the images, feeling the familiar wall of distrust rising inside her. After weeks of allowing herself to believe in Sophia's authenticity, the betrayal stung more than she wanted to admit. "Bring her to my office first thing tomorrow," Elena said, discreetly. The next morning, Sophia arrived to find Elena standing at her window, back turned, voice dangerously quiet. "Would you care to explain your meeting with Martin Reeves?" Sophia froze, the color draining from her face. "You had me followed." Elena turned, her expression hard. "I have many enemies, Sophia. I'd be foolish not to protect myself." They stared at each other, the warm camaraderie of recent weeks suddenly replaced by tension thick enough to cut. "It's not what you think," Sophia finally said, her voice shaking. "Then tell me what it is." Elena's tone left no room for evasion. To Elena's surprise, Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "He approached me 3 weeks ago, outside my apartment. He knew everything about me, my classes, my brother, even where I buy coffee." She took a shaky breath. "He said his boss was interested in Mercer Innovations and that I could earn good money by sharing information." "And you agreed?" Elena's voice was dangerously quiet. "No, I told him to get lost." Sophia wiped angrily at her tears. "But then he showed me pictures of my brother going to work, to class. He said that accidents happen all the time in New York, unless I cooperated." Elena's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "So you've been feeding Walsh information about my company?" "Yes," Sophia admitted. "But only things anyone could find online. Product launch dates that are already public. Press release information. Nothing real." She looked up, desperation in her eyes. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you, but I was scared. My brother is all the family I have left." Elena studied her for a long moment. Years of corporate battles had taught her to recognize a lie. Against all logic, she believed Sophia. "Why didn't you come to me immediately?" Elena asked, her voice softening slightly. "Because I was terrified," Sophia answered honestly. "You're Elena Mercer. You run a billion-dollar company. People like you and Walsh are way above my world." I didn't know what to do. Elena walked slowly to her desk and pressed a button. Moments later, Robert entered. "Get protection for Sophia's brother," she ordered. "Full surveillance, but keep it invisible." Robert nodded and left as Sophia stared in disbelief. "You believe me," she whispered. "Against my better judgment, yes." Elena's smile was grim. "Walsh made a serious miscalculation. He threatened someone under my protection." Sophia shook her head, confused. "But why would you protect me? You barely know me." Elena's expression softened just slightly. "Because in 3 weeks, you've shown more integrity and brilliance than most people I've known for years." She paused. "And because Walsh just gave us an opportunity I've been waiting for." "What do you mean?" A gleam appeared in Elena's eyes, the look of a strategic mind seeing the pieces align on a chessboard. "Walsh wants information. Let's give it to him. Exactly the kind of information I want him to have." Understanding dawned on Sophia's face. "You want me to be a double agent?" Elena nodded. Are you willing to help me? For the first time since entering the office, Sophia stood straight, shoulders back, fear replaced by determination. When do we start? The morning light filtered through the blinds as Sophia sat in Elena's private office, watching the billionaire pull a thick folder from a hidden safe behind a painting. The label read Chen in bold letters. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she placed it on the desk between them. Before we go any further, Elena said, her voice unusually quiet, you need to understand what you're getting involved in. This goes deeper than corporate espionage. Sophia leaned forward, her curiosity mixed with growing anxiety. For weeks, she'd been playing this dangerous game, but something in Elena's expression told her they were crossing into even more treacherous territory. Who is Chen? Sophia asked. Elena took a deep breath. Dr. Amara Chen was the most brilliant scientist I've ever known. She was my mentor, my friend. Elena paused, collecting herself. 7 years ago, she developed a revolutionary clean energy technology that could have changed the world. Something that could replace fossil fuels entirely with minimal environmental impact. Elena opened the folder, revealing photographs of a petite woman with intelligent eyes and a warm smile. Amara believed that kind of discovery belonged to humanity, not to corporations. She wanted to share it freely with the world. What happened to her? Sophia asked, though something in her gut told her she already knew the answer. She died, Elena said flatly. A lab accident that was never properly investigated. It happened right after she met with Walsh and me to discuss commercial applications of her work. Sophia's eyes widened. You think Walsh was responsible? I know he was, Elena's voice hardened, but I could never prove it. After her death, all her research mysteriously disappeared. The technology that could have revolutionized clean energy vanished. She closed her eyes briefly. Everyone assumed I had stolen it, or that it had died with her. But it didn't, Sophia guessed. Elena's eyes met hers. No. Amara was too smart for that. She kept backups, fragments of her work hidden in various places. I've spent 7 years collecting the pieces, continuing her research in secret. That's why you built Mercer Innovations, Sophia realized. Not just for success, but to finish her work. And to make Walsh pay for what he did, Elena admitted. The rivalry between us isn't just business, it's justice. Sophia sat back, her mind racing. But what does this have to do with me? Why tell me this now? Because Walsh is asking for something valuable, and I'm giving him doctored files from Amara's research. Enough to make him think he's finally getting what he's wanted all these years. Elena's expression was grim. I need you to understand the stakes before you deliver them. Sophia nodded slowly, but something didn't feel right. She'd spent enough time in Elena's company to recognize when the billionaire wasn't sharing everything. May I look at the research? She asked. Elena hesitated, then pushed the folder toward her. This is just a small portion. The complete files are elsewhere. As Sophia began reviewing the documents, her environmental science training kicked in. The equations and designs were beyond cutting edge. They were revolutionary. But as she studied them more carefully, certain elements seemed oddly familiar. Elena, she said slowly, some of these molecular structures, they're similar to something I studied last semester. A paper on theoretical energy conversion. Elena looked surprised. What paper? It was by a Professor Liu at Columbia. He cited some obscure research from 7 years ago. Sophia's brow furrowed as she flipped through more pages. Then she stopped, her finger tracing a signature at the bottom of one document. A. Chen. Sophia looked up, realization dawning. The professor mentioned that the original researcher had died before completing her work. He was trying to build on her theories. She continued examining the documents, her trained eye noticing inconsistencies that others might miss. Finally, she looked up at Elena, who had been watching her intently. There's something strange here, Sophia said carefully. These formulas, they don't entirely match up with what I remember from the paper. And there's a third signature on some of these early drafts. She pointed to a small, nearly illegible scrawl. Elena leaned forward, her face paling. What are you saying? I'm saying. Sophia hesitated, knowing she was stepping into dangerous territory. I'm saying that according to these documents, neither you nor Walsh created this technology originally. It was Dr. Chen, yes, but there are references to earlier collaborative work. 3 sets of initials on the original concept papers. Elena sat motionless, her expression unreadable. Elena, Sophia said gently, did Walsh actually steal this from you? Or did you both take it from Dr. Chen after she died? The room fell completely silent. For a moment, Sophia thought she'd made a terrible mistake. Then Elena did something unexpected. She laughed, a small, bitter sound with no humor in it. You're even smarter than I thought, Elena said, her voice strangely relieved. No, Walsh didn't steal it from me. And I didn't steal it from her. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. We were a team once, Amara, Dominic, and me. The 3 of us were going to change the world together. She turned back to Sophia. But then Amara made a breakthrough that was far beyond what any of us had imagined. Something that could upend the entire energy industry overnight. Walsh wanted to patent it, control it, sell it to the highest bidder. I wanted to develop it responsibly. Amara. Elena's voice softened. Amara wanted to give it away. What really happened to her? Sophia asked, hardly daring to breathe. The official story is that there was a lab accident, an explosion. Elena's eyes held a deep sadness. I was away at a conference. When I returned, Amara was gone, the lab was destroyed, and Walsh had taken whatever research he could salvage. You think he caused the explosion? I don't know, Elena admitted. I've spent 7 years trying to find out. What I do know is that he buried the technology. He has investments in oil, coal, natural gas. A true clean energy revolution would have cost him billions. So you built your company to continue her work, Sophia said, finally understanding. Elena nodded. I've almost succeeded. The work you've been helping with, our energy storage systems, they're the final piece. Once completed, we'll have recreated Amara's vision. A truly sustainable energy source that could change everything. Sophia sat in stunned silence, absorbing the magnitude of what Elena had shared. Then a terrible thought occurred to her. Elena, if Walsh finds out how close you are to completing Dr. Chen's work, he'll do whatever it takes to stop me, Elena finished grimly, just like he stopped Amara. Before Sophia could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. Her face went white as she read it. What is it? Elena asked sharply. Sophia turned the phone so Elena could see the screen. It was a message from an unknown number containing only a photo of her brother tied to a chair, looking terrified. They've taken him, Sophia whispered, her voice breaking. Walsh has my brother. Elena's face hardened as she read the message that followed. Bring the real Chen files tonight. Alone, or he dies. Robert. Elena called, and her security chief appeared instantly. They've moved against us, locked down the building. She turned to Sophia, whose hands were shaking as she stared at her phone. We're going to get your brother back. I promise you that. How? Sophia asked, tears threatening to spill. A dangerous look crossed Elena's face. By giving Walsh exactly what he wants, the complete Chen files. But you said that would be disastrous, Sophia protested. I didn't say which version of the files we give him, Elena replied, her voice steely with resolve. It's time Walsh learned what happens when he threatens someone I care about. Night had fallen by the time Elena's car pulled up to the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Sophia sat beside her, clutching a metal briefcase containing what appeared to be Dr. Chen's complete research. Her face was pale but determined. Are you sure about this? Elena asked, studying Sophia's expression in the dim light. My brother is in there, Sophia said simply. I don't have a choice. What she didn't say was how terrified she felt. Just hours ago, her biggest worry had been paying next semester's tuition. Now she was involved in what felt like a scene from a thriller movie: kidnapping, blackmail, and revolutionary technology that powerful people would kill to control. Remember the plan, Elena said, squeezing Sophia's hand. The flash drive contains a sophisticated tracking program. As soon as they try to access the files, we'll know where they take it. And the Trojan horse program will activate, Sophia added, recalling the details Elena had explained back at Mercer Tower. Sending copies of all Walsh's illegal operations to federal authorities. Exactly, Elena nodded. But if anything goes wrong, if you sense any danger, you get out immediately. Your brother has a tracker on him too. My security team is surrounding this place. We will get him out, with or without the exchange. Sophia took a deep breath. I understand. I'll be listening through your earpiece the whole time, Elena reminded her. Robert and his team are in position. The warehouse loomed ahead, its broken windows like dark eyes watching their approach. Sophia stepped out of the car, her legs surprisingly steady as she walked toward the entrance, briefcase in hand. Elena watched her go, fighting the urge to follow her inside. This wasn't supposed to be her fight, and yet somehow this young woman had become someone she cared about deeply. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit by a few hanging bulbs that cast long shadows across the concrete floor. Sophia's footsteps echoed as she walked toward the center of the empty space. "Hello," she called, her voice bouncing off the walls. A door opened at the far end, and two men emerged, flanking a third figure who walked with confident, measured steps. Even from a distance, Sophia could feel the power radiating from him. Dominic Walsh was taller than she expected, his silver hair and tailored suit making him look more like a distinguished politician than a ruthless businessman. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said, his voice smooth and cultured. "At last we meet in person." "Where's my brother?" Sophia demanded, surprised by her own boldness. Walsh smiled coldly. "Direct. I like that." He gestured to one of his men, who disappeared back through the door. "The briefcase, please." "My brother first," Sophia insisted. Walsh studied her for a moment, then nodded slightly. The door opened again, and Sophia's heart leaped as her brother was pushed into the room, his hands bound behind his back, a bruise darkening one side of his face. "Louis," she cried out, taking an involuntary step forward. "I'm okay, Soph," he said, though his voice shook. "Don't give them anything." Walsh moved closer to Sophia, ignoring Louis. "The Chen research. After all these years, I must admit I'm impressed that Elena managed to piece it together." His eyes narrowed. "That is what you have in that case, isn't it?" Sophia lifted the briefcase slightly. "Everything Dr. Chen was working on before she died. Release my brother, and it's yours." Walsh studied her face carefully. "You know, there's something familiar about you. Have we met before?" Sophia's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. "I think I'd remember meeting someone like you." Walsh continued to stare at her, a strange expression crossing his face. Then, seemingly satisfied, he nodded to the man holding Louis. "Release him." As her brother was shoved forward, Sophia stepped ahead and placed the briefcase on the ground between them. Louis stumbled toward her, and she rushed to help him, fumbling with the zip ties around his wrists. "The briefcase," Walsh reminded her. With Louis finally free, Sophia kicked the case toward Walsh. "It's all there. Now we're leaving." Walsh bent down to retrieve the case, his eyes never leaving Sophia's face. As he straightened, a look of shock passed over his features. "You look just like her," he whispered. "What?" Sophia asked, confused. Before Walsh could answer, the warehouse doors burst open. Armed security officers in tactical gear rushed in, weapons raised. But they weren't Elena's team. They wore Walsh Enterprises insignias. "Sir, Mercer's people are surrounding the building," one shouted. "We need to leave now." In the confusion, Walsh grabbed Sophia's arm, using her as a shield as he backed toward the exit. "Nobody moves," he shouted, "or she dies right here." Sophia heard Elena's voice through her earpiece. "Stay calm." "I'm coming in." Another door opened, and Elena Mercer walked into the warehouse, her expression calm, but her eyes blazing with fury. "Let her go, Dominic. This is between us." "Elena," Walsh sneered. Always the hero. But too late as usual, he tightened his grip on Sophia. "I have what I came for." "Do you?" Elena tilted her head. "Open the case." Something in her tone made Walsh hesitate. Still holding Sophia, he nodded to one of his men, who carefully opened the briefcase. Inside was a laptop and several hard drives. "Check it," Walsh ordered. The man connected one of the drives to the laptop. The screen lit up, displaying folders labeled with Dr. Chen's name. As he clicked on one, the screen flashed briefly, then returned to normal. "It's here," the man confirmed. "All of Dr. Chen's research, including the final formulas." Walsh's face lit up with triumph. After all these years, he said to Elena, I finally win. You think so? Elena's smile was dangerous. The moment your man accessed those files, a program activated. Right now, every illegal operation you've ever conducted is being delivered to the FBI, SEC, and Department of Justice. Bank records, offshore accounts, evidence of industrial sabotage, everything. Walsh's face contorted with rage. You're bluffing. Check your phone, Elena suggested calmly. As if on cue, Walsh's phone began to buzz repeatedly with incoming messages. His face paled as he scrolled through them one-handed, still gripping Sofia. That's not all, Elena continued. Those files you're so excited about, they're corrupted. Deliberately. If you try to implement them as written, the result would be catastrophic failure, possibly explosive. She paused, letting the implication sink in. Kind of like what happened to Amara's lab, wouldn't you say? Walsh's composure finally broke. You have no idea what happened that night, he shouted. You weren't there. But you were, Elena said quietly. Weren't you, Darnick? The tension in the warehouse was electric. Sofia could feel Walsh's grip loosening as his attention fixed on Elena. Taking advantage of his distraction, she stomped hard on his instep and twisted away from his grasp. As she ran toward Lewis, Walsh reached inside his jacket. Elena shouted a warning, and suddenly security teams from both sides had their weapons raised. Time seemed to slow as Walsh pulled out not a gun, but a small photograph, which he thrust toward Sofia. Look at her, he demanded. Look at her face. Despite herself, Sofia glanced at the photo. It showed a younger Dr. Chen, smiling beside what appeared to be her husband. In the woman's arms was a small baby. You're her daughter, Walsh said, his voice breaking. Amara's daughter. Sofia froze, her world tilting sideways. What? No, that's impossible. Elena stepped forward, her face ashen. Sofia. Before she could continue, the sound of police sirens filled the air. Walsh's security team began to scatter. This isn't over, Walsh kissed at Elena. Then his eyes fixed on Sofia one last time. You deserve to know the truth about what happened to your mother, and who's really responsible. With that, he turned and ran, disappearing through a side door just as police officers began pouring into the warehouse. In the chaos that followed, Sofia stood rooted to the spot, the photograph clutched in her hand, while Louise wrapped a protective arm around her shoulders. Her mind reeled with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Elena approached slowly, her expression a mix of concern and something that looked almost like fear. Is it true? Sofia whispered. Am I really Dr. Chen's daughter? Elena's silence was all the confirmation she needed. You knew, Sofia realized, her voice hollow. You knew who I was all along. No. Elena shook her head. Not at first. I suspected, after I saw your aptitude for the work, your intuitive understanding of Amara's research. But I wasn't certain until recently. Why didn't you tell me? Sofia demanded, tears filling her eyes. Because I was afraid, Elena admitted, her voice barely audible above the commotion around them. Afraid of what you'd think when you learned the whole truth about what happened 7 years ago. Sofia looked from Elena to the retreating figure of Walsh, then back at the photograph in her trembling hand. The face of the woman who might be her mother stared back at her, with eyes that matched her own. What is the truth? She asked quietly. Elena's eyes filled with tears. It's complicated and not what either of us told you. But I promise, when we're safe, I'll tell you everything I know. As they were escorted out of the warehouse by police, Sofia held tightly to her brother with one hand and the photograph with the other. The night sky above was clear and full of stars, but her path forward had never felt more uncertain. Sofia stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Elena's penthouse, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold. 3 days had passed since the warehouse confrontation, 3 days of questions, revelations, and a complete reshaping of everything she thought she knew about herself. Couldn't sleep? Elena's voice came softly from behind her. Sofia didn't turn around. How could I? Every time I close my eyes, I see her face, my mother's face. The DNA test results had come back yesterday, confirming what Walsh had claimed. Sofia Rodriguez was indeed the biological daughter of Dr. Amara Chen. She had been adopted as an infant after her parents' supposed deaths in a car accident, a story fabricated to protect her. I still can't believe my adoptive parents never told me, Sophia said, her voice hollow. All those years. Elena joined her at the window, keeping a respectful distance. They were trying to protect you. After what happened to Amara, they feared you might be in danger if anyone knew who you really were. And they were right, Sophia said bitterly. Look what happened as soon as Walsh figured it out. The silence between them stretched, filled with unspoken questions. Finally, Sophia turned to face Elena. You promised to tell me everything, she said. I need to know the truth, all of it. Elena nodded, her face solemn. You deserve that much. But first, there's someone else you should hear it from. She gestured toward the elevator, which dinged softly as it reached the penthouse level. The doors slid open to reveal Dominic Walsh. Sophia took an instinctive step back. What is he doing here? Walsh looked different from the imposing figure at the warehouse. His expensive suit was replaced by simple slacks and a sweater. His face appeared older, lined with weariness and something that looked almost like grief. He's here because both of us owe you the full story, Elena explained. And neither of us has all the pieces. I won't hurt you, Walsh said quietly, remaining by the elevator. I've done enough damage. Elena gestured to the living room. Shall we sit? Reluctantly, Sophia followed them to the comfortable seating area, where Lewis was already waiting. Her brother had refused to leave her side since the warehouse, his protective instincts on high alert. He eyed Walsh with unconcealed suspicion. Start at the beginning, Sophia demanded once they were all seated. Who was my mother, really? And what happened to her? Elena and Walsh exchanged a look that contained years of history. Amara Chen was the most brilliant scientist either of us ever knew, Elena began. We met her in graduate school. The three of us became inseparable, best friends, research partners, dreamers. We were going to change the world together. We founded our first company in her apartment, Walsh continued, his voice softening with memory. Amara was the genius, Elena the visionary, and I was the businessman who could sell their ideas. What went wrong? Louis asked, speaking for the first time. Walsh's expression darkened. Money. Success. The things that corrupt most partnerships. Our first few patents were incredibly successful. Suddenly we weren't struggling students anymore. We were millionaires with different priorities. Amara wanted to focus on environmental technologies, Elena explained. Particularly clean energy. It was her passion, her purpose. Walsh and I were more interested in expanding the company, diversifying. We argued, Walsh admitted. Often. But we still worked well together. Until Amara made her breakthrough. Sophia leaned forward. The clean energy technology you've both been fighting over. Elena nodded. It was revolutionary. A completely new approach to energy generation with virtually no environmental impact. Something that could replace fossil fuels entirely. When Amara explained what she discovered, Walsh said, I immediately saw the commercial potential. Billions of dollars. But I also saw the danger. Danger? Sophia asked. To our existing investments, Elena said coldly. Walsh had recently diversified into traditional energy markets. Oil, coal, natural gas. Amara's discovery would have made those investments worthless overnight. Walsh didn't deny it. I wanted to control the release of the technology, implement it gradually, allow markets to adjust. Elena sided with Amara, who wanted to release it immediately freely. The arguments became intense, Elena continued. Then Amara discovered she was pregnant. She looked directly at Sophia. With you. Sophia felt Louis's hand on her shoulder, steadying her. What happened after I was born? She asked, her throat tight. Walsh and Elena exchanged another look, this one filled with tension. We had scheduled a meeting, Walsh said slowly, to make final decisions about the technology. Amara brought you, just a few months old. It was the first time I'd seen you. A shadow passed over his face. You had your mother's eyes even then. I was delayed. Elena picked up the story. A traffic accident on the bridge. By the time I arrived at the lab, her voice faltered. There had been an explosion, Walsh said, his voice hollow. The lab was in flames. I had stepped out to take a call just moments before. When I tried to get back in to find Amara and you, the firefighters held me back. They found one body, Elena said quietly. identified as Amara. No sign of you. You were presumed to have died in the fire. We were both devastated. But I didn't die, Sophia said. So what really happened? Walsh leaned forward, hands clasped tightly. This is where our stories diverge. For years, I believed Elena had arranged the explosion to steal Amara's research. She believed the same of me. And the truth? Lewis pressed. The truth, came a new voice from the elevator area, is more complicated than either of them knew. Everyone turned. A man stood by the elevator, older, Asian, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Sophia felt a strange jolt of recognition, though she was certain she'd never seen him before. "Who are you?" she asked, rising to her feet. The man's eyes filled with tears as he looked at her. "My name is David Chen. I'm your father." The room fell silent as the impact of his words sank in. Elena and Walsh looked as shocked as Sophia felt. "That's impossible," Elena finally said. "David died with Amara in the explosion." "No," the man said, stepping forward. "I was never there. When I learned what the three of you were arguing about, I feared for my family's safety. The stakes were too high, the technology too valuable." He looked at Sophia. "I took you from the lab that day, just before the explosion. We went into hiding, new names, new lives." "But I grew up with the Rodriguez family," Sophia said, confused. "Yes," David nodded. "When you were 3, I realized I couldn't protect you properly on my own. The Rodriguez family were distant relatives of Amara's. They agreed to raise you as their own, to keep you safe until the danger passed." His voice broke. "I've watched you from a distance your whole life." Sophia sank back into her seat, overwhelmed. "Then who caused the explosion? Who killed my mother?" David Chen looked from Walsh to Elena. Neither of them. The lab explosion was caused by Amara herself. The revelation hit the room like a physical force.